Good morning. A few words on who we are and a few words on what is the purpose of this session this morning. But we are lawyers, sorry about that. But we are here to talk and to discuss and to have some ideas on the regulatory, on the fintech. Kramer-Levin is an American law firm. This is why I will let Dana to introduce Kramer-Levin better than me. And then we will introduce ourselves. Dana?
Okay, so Kramer-Levin is, as Hubert said, an American law firm with a main office in New York, about 400 attorneys in New York. And in Paris, we have about 40, 50 attorneys. We're a full-service law firm with a particular focus on finance, especially here in Paris, where we have Hubert, Jean-Pierre Matou, and some other lawyers who have all a very long background in-house at banks and financial services companies. So we have a real mix between people who have operational experience and legal experience. We do litigation, we do droit social, employment, tax, basically full service. In New York, we're well known for mutual funds and hedge funds, as well as a variety of other areas. I'm sorry, and we also have an office in Silicon Valley, which I forgot about, which is basically an IP office focused on patent litigation, but still is a foothold in California.
As an aside of some of the Paris lawyers are coming from the industry, and which is quite strange and interesting if you look about the other law firms. I am a young lawyer, if I may, as Dana is not a young lawyer, but is
an old lawyer.
No, a real lawyer, a true lawyer, because I spent more than 25 years on my professional career in various banks, from BNP Paribas to Crédit Agricole, including as a in-house counsel and before as a trader. I used to be a trader during 7 years on derivatives, and I moved. I am a pure lawyer by education because I have a PhD. But I think it was good to have an idea on what does it mean for a lawyer to be within traders in a trading room. And not most, but some of other partners, as Dana said, are coming from the asset management, from the banking, from the insurance companies, in order to have this in-house vision, which is important. And specifically on the fintech, because most of the people in the fintech are coming now from the industry. I think it is interesting to see about you. Who are you from? Who are from the industry on the fintech? Who are from the financial industry? Okay, most of you. Who are not from the industry? The rest of the room, which is good. Okay, that means for those who are coming from the industry, you're supposed to know the issues and the legal issues and, on regulatory and the importance of the regulatory for the fintech. Who are the fintech? If I just take the definition of the France Fintech, the France Fintech is the association who is supposed to represent the industry in France. Fintech are first not only startup companies who are active in the financial industry. By financial industry, it means insurance, investment services, banking, asset management, or more globally, wealth management, and payment services. All this industry is supposed to be the financial industry. And fintech, that means for the France Fintech, to be member of the France Fintech, if you want to be member of the France Fintech, you must demonstrate that you have a digital approach. And somewhere you have a tech in your business plan, if I may, in your activity. Few words, because all of the issue concerning the fintech is startup, but not only innovation, because as I said before, it is a new approach for the customer and with the customer in finance and with technology. That means the financial industry is heavily regulated in France and everywhere. And one of the issues for you is to ensure you are somewhere in the regulation, you are not in the regulation. Some people want to be out the regulation, others want to be within the regulation. And it will be one of your first questions for you, where I am. If I am in or out regulation. You can be out regulation, even though it is quite difficult to continue to growth, but you can start to be out regulation, but the first question is where I am. You know all the figures, and some of my figures are not so accurate. I will
Up to date.
Exactly. Thank you again. But voilà, this last figure is from 14, which is not accurate. Just to see the growth of the investment on the fintech. The idea of today is to give you a picture on the various status and requirements who are applicable in France, but not only in France, but in Europe, because financial industry is not only regulated in France, as you know, but in Europe, with the various directives and regulations. To start, what are the main activities on fintech? Dana?
So we have it listed here. The main activities you'll find in the fintech industry are crowdfunding. That's really the major activity and the one that tends to be the sexiest, or at least get the most notice. Electronic payments is a big activity. I don't know how many of you are in that, but that's growing. Intermediation in banking and payment services, intermediation of insurance, of course, and then investment services.
In France, the first issue is to know who are your regulator. You have first the ECPR, the French Prudential Supervision Authority, which is more or less the Bank of France. The Bank of France and the ECPR is in charge of the banking and insurance industry. Then you have the AMF, the French Securities and Market Authority, who is in charge of asset management, wealth management, yes, and capital market. And this is not an authority, strictly speaking, but this is important for you because often you will start by registration to the ORIAS. The ORIAS is the French registration authority for intermediaries and insurance and payment services. To be short, it is the unique, not authority, but registrar. Where you can see if you are registered or not to this authority. But you will see that sometimes you need to be registered at the ORIAS, even though you are not registered by ACPR or AMF. Dana, maybe a few words about what happened since June 1st in this year with this new creation of the FinTech office.
Yeah, so the two regulatory authorities that Hubert just mentioned, just showing their dedication and their interest in this area, have created dedicated units for dealing sort of as a guichet unique, a one-stop shop where you can go in and get information and deal with the regulators. At the AMF, it's the FinTech Innovation Unit. At the ACPR, it's FinTech Innovation and Competitiveness Unit. This came out of, they had a first dual together, co-sponsored, that's the word I'm looking for, a forum on June 1st, and there'll be another on July 18th. And together, the two regulators are trying to enact regulation that will make things easier and streamline services.
This is important to know that this idea to create such a unit at IMF and ACPR is a demand from the industry and specifically from France FinTech in order to duplicate what happens in London.
Yeah, that's right. The FCA has a similar FinTech hub that you go to get information. It's sort of a you can remain informed as to what's happening in the industry, and you go there to sort of find out where you should go. So the FCA does that, and the AMF pretty much just mirrored that. Which is good for you is to know before to spend money to lawyers, you can directly call and to discuss with those guys in order to let you know, okay, where I am. And this is important. You do some issue spotting before you start the clock running. Yeah, exactly. Now we can start by the existing legal status for FinTech. As often in Europe, if you are doing some activities, you have regulation and status. We have status for payment institutions, other for electronic payment institutions. Something which is quite interesting is agent providing payment services, which is another status with as agent. Then you have the financial investment advisor, which is well known as the CIF, conseiller en investissement financier.
The crowdfunding intermediaries with a specific regulation for the crowdfunding. The crowdfunding advisor, the CIP, specifically with a new reform this year. The investment service providers, the intermediaries in insurance, and then intermediaries in banking transaction and payment services. Here you have everything that you can provide to your client, and you have now to make a choice if you want to have a choice to be in regulation and not to be out regulation. That means you have to decide in which box you must and you want to be.
Of these statuses that are set out here are statuses that have existed and that financial players already fall into, and that we're saying that fintech players can glom onto as well. So you may fall into something that's a classic, a regulatory status that has existed for years and that applies to many other players, not just fintech, or you may actually opt for one depending on your activity that is specific to the fintech and that was created for them.
Yeah, and now we will see for each of the statues what is the content of each of the statues, and as you will see, we have question of requirements, specifically in terms of capital or not, in terms of experience, in terms of registration, which is not exactly the same. We'll start now with the ACPR, that means for the banking and payment services activities. We have payment institutions, electronic institutions, agent, and crowdfunding. By definition, we have totally exclude the banking license, Dana.
It's not really fintech to say.
Exactly.
I mean, banks obviously are going digital and providing a lot of fintech services, but that would be under their banking license.
By definition, in Europe, banks are universal banks. That means they can provide everything in the financial industry except for insurance, of course, but for the asset management, for the investment services, capital market, payment, and banking activities, as with a unique license, they can provide every services. We have excluded a presentation of banks because it is too heavy for a startup to start by this license, even though we have seen in Europe and including in France some startup with this license.
Yeah, with the newer banks that are completely online, for example, or things like that. Yeah.
Payment institutions. Payment institutions is first to execute payment transactions. With a card or without a card, it depends, but the definition is to execute payment transactions. And or to issue or acquire payment instruments, and to, which is not known, to grant credit. That means a payment institution can grant credit if it is an ancillary activity and not its main activities. As you maybe know, those payment institutions are quite important on the startup and fintech industry because it is clearly a lot of technology where you can disrupt a lot of the banking services. What is the procedure to be regulated as a payment institution? You have to file to ACPR. Legally speaking, it takes 3 months. In practice, between 1 year and 2 years. Why this difference? And then you have the answer from ACPR. Why is the difference between 3 months and 1 year and 2 years? Dana, do you have an idea?
Well, I mean, the answer comes back with a lot of questions.
Okay, but to be short, because first this 3 months period start when the file is considered by ACPR as completed. As by definition, it is never completed when you
first file it.
Exactly. Electronic payment institution, money electronic, operate an electronic money as PayPal. This is only e-money institution. And same ID, you have to file a form to ACPR, same time, same answer. Then you have the third status on the banking and for specifically on the payment industry, which is less heavy than the two previous status, which is agent. Agent is agent in one of the previous status. Agent means appointed by ACPR and approved by payment institution and or electronic payment institution. While you are agent, you are providing your service on behalf of the payment institution or the e-money institutions. You provide, of course, payment service, but on behalf of. And this is not exactly the same filing, because if you have to file to a CPR, in fact, this is not you who file to a CPR, this is the payment institution who file for you.
Your principal.
And it takes 3 months again. And in this case, it is more, yes.
It's actually
yes, it takes,
closer to 3 months.
Exactly. This is for the payment institutions. Then you have the crowdfunding within the definition of ACPR. That means crowdfunding, to be short, crowd-lending activities. Crowdfunding, what is the difference with a bank or with a credit institution? That means you provide activity through an internet platform. This is the definition. You must have an internet platform to be regulated as a crowdfunding platform. As you perfectly know, you have 3 types of crowdfunding activities, Dana. You have
donations, lending, and capital.
Then you have loans with or without interest, and of course you have investment as advice services. In this case, the procedure is not exactly the same as for the previous status. You have first 3 kind of a platform, Dana.
Right, you have crowdfunding intermediary, crowdfunding advisor, or investment service provider, which is sort of a full license. You start with crowdfunding intermediary, which I think is the easiest. An advisor is advising actually on shares or securities being issued, so it's a heavier procedure. And then investment services provider would be sort of an asset management company almost.
This is quite a new status. They have been created 2 years ago now by an ordinance from May 30th. As Dana said, you have the IFP and the CIP. IFP is for more or less for loans for the debt industries and activities, when CIP is for the investment activities. The idea of those 2 statuses is to let a startup to have a quite a light statute to start without the heavy statute as a bank or as an investment service provider. As I said before, this is typically the case where the status must be registered to the ORIAS. You remember what I said before? The ORIAS, you can be registered even though you have not a license from the ACPR or from IMF. In this case, for the IFP, ACPR is not issuing a license for you, but you have to be registered to the ORIAS. This is very easy and very simple. It takes between 1 month and 2 months, no more. And the main issue is the experience and or
knowledge, skills.
And the knowledge, exactly. Maybe a few words about this experience, this knowledge, Dana?
Basically, that the managers and those running the platform have the knowledge and experience in the financial field to know what they're doing and to run the thing.
This is very specific. You have to download in the ORIAS the list of
requirements.
Your requirements, specifically in terms of background university. If your diploma is in the list, this is good for you. If this is not in the list, this is bad for you. Even though this is from a top of university, sometimes your university have not be registered to the ORIAS because they have forgotten to be registered by the ORIAS. I have in mind some interesting business school, very well known, who are not registered to the ORIAS, and this is sometimes an issue for some of you. If you are not on the list, the only possibility in this case is the experience within the industry. It is, again, one of the 2 conditions. You have to demonstrate an experience within the industry. If you have not this experience, you have to demonstrate you have a diploma which is supposed to give you an ID on the...
Have you seen cases where they've gone back and asked the school to get themselves registered?
Yeah.
Does the school do that? it's a little difficult.
Yeah.
It takes longer than a month.
Exactly. Again, this status is not a registered status. That means ORIAS have no power to say yes and no. If you fulfill all the requirements, you are registered 1 month after.
So check the box.
Exactly. And it gives you at least an authorization to provide some activities to the public. And you will often start by this status, one of the status of the ORIAS. And one of the two statuses are IFP. We will come back to the CIP after, but agent and IFP are quite interesting for you. Crowdlending. You know that you have two kinds of activities, P2P lending and P2B lending. You have a specific regulation for those activities that you know. You have plenty of documents, including to the CPR website, to understand and to know what does it mean. But this is a specific activity for which you need to have the IFP status. Now this is for the ACPR, and the first thing for you is, okay, what is my activity? Does it match with the requirements of the ACPR? If not, maybe it will match with the IMF. And then you are in another world. The first world is the world for the banking industry, the banking and insurance industry, including payments. Here, we are going to the investment services and the capital market industry, which is totally different world. You have, again, the status of investment services and the status of CIF and the IFP I have mentioned before. Investment services providers, maybe Dana, a few words.
An investment service provider is essentially a portfolio management company, an asset management company that can hold funds and security and then manage those on behalf of its clients. So it's a full status, and it's a very heavy procedure. You have to have a minimum amount of capital between 50,000 and 125,000 euros required. And so anything else you want to click on that? And this is the process. So you fill out your form, you send it to both the ACPR and the AMF. The form is filled for the ACPR, but the AMF has an opinion to give, and there's 4 to 5 months of review, although in reality...
1 year to 2 years.
Yeah.
But it depends the quality of
and and part of that is the response you're going to get back, and you have to respond, but part of it is just preparing the thing well enough to get it ready to complete, because you know what you need, or at least people who have experience would know what you need, so it takes time.
And for the first time in the status that we are explaining, you see a requirement in terms of capital. For the IFP, as for the agent, you have no requirement in terms of capital. You can start with 0, but the reality is quite different. I will come back after. You have the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law, including for the status where you have no legal requirements in terms of capital, IMF and ACPR are expected from you a minimum of 1 year of charge to be
working capital.
Working as a working capital. 1 year of charge to be as a working capital. Here, something which is quite difficult to understand, you are not familiar with this with regulators. As Dana said, you have a double authorization, if I may, from ACPR and IMF. As it is an investment services who is in charge to provide the authorization, it is IMF. But IMF is, if I may, under control of ACPR for this activity, because the registration, the final registration, is at the end from the ACPR. This is why it is so long, because you have to convince first IMF and then ACPR that your file is completed, and most only completed, but your business plan is important. And this is now maybe time to give you some practical aspect of what is a file, how a file is completed. A file for an investment service provider is between 200 pages and 800 pages. It depends. In this file, you have first to explain your business model, your activity, and your plan. You have after to give information about your organization, your capital requirements, and your procedures. often you are familiar, or you are supposed to be familiar to have some ideas on business plan and your activity, but you are not familiar at all with the procedures. And procedures on KYC, on anti-money laundering, on all those issues you are not familiar with. And if it doesn't work with ACPR or IMF requirement, you have no license. And this is why sometimes it takes so long time, because this is typically a way where you have to have someone with you to help you to write and to prepare the file with you and for you, as a law firm or with a specific advisor, sometimes with a technical advisor too. It depends. But it is an interactive discussion with regulator and you. This is why, again, it takes a long time. And often it takes time because people are not aware about what the ACPR and the IMF are expected. All those procedures have been implemented years and years. Clearly, they have not been implemented for fintech. That means you have to adapt yourself to these procedures and not the contrary. Even though with these new offices of the fintech office at the IMF and the ACPR, they try now to be more flexible in terms of interaction with you, but the content of the file is the same for a startup or for any bank who wants to have a new activity and is asking for registration. As said at the end of the slide, CIP or CIF, for which I will come back after, is a more flexible status for the fintech because it doesn't require any minimum capital, which is important. What else? Again, we'll come back after to the content of the file. This is now time to present the CIF and a license. CIF is something very strange and special. This is legally speaking a status, but this is not under control of AMF nor ECPR. It is an exception on the regulation where you are regulated, but not heavy regulated, if I may, because you are not directly controlled by those two institutions, ECPR and IMF. But you have to be registered to the ORIAS with the experience and the diploma, as I explained before. What does it mean, CIF? It is Financial Investment Advisor. It is known as a, how do you say that in the US, the same?
Financial advisor.
Financial advisor too. But for the ORIAS, you have not only this status, you have the intermediaries in banking transactions, in insurance, and the IFP, as I mentioned before. The idea is to give to the public the possibility to check in a unique registrar in France if the person in front of you is really registered to the office. Not if it is not an escrow.
And that registration meaning that you have the right diploma, at a minimum that you have a certain diploma and certain skills and experience. It may mean more depending on what your status is, but at a minimum, for example, for a CIF where all you have to do is register, at least you know that.
The financial investment advisor is something very simple, is an activity where you provide an investment advice, to be short. An investment advice in the meaning of investment services, but an investment advice. And advice is important. That means you have to, at the end of the day, give an advice, yes or no, buy or sell to your clients. Yes, buy or sell, to be short. Intermediaries in banking transactions is execution on banking transactions or payment services on behalf, again, of banks, payment institutions, or clients. And your activity is to assist your client, even though the client is a payment institution or a bank institution, or to assist your client if it is an individual. Intermediaries in insurance is the same, but it includes reinsurance mediation, and CIF and FIP, and CIP is for investment activity on crowdfunding. one of the most important for you, because you will often start with the ORIAS, is what is the procedure before the ORIAS. And you see the name, Registre unique des intermédiaires. No license required. It is only check the box.
Check the box, registration, yeah.
Registration.
You have to be on the correct applicable register. There's different registers depending on what your activity is.
This is quite the condition of honorability of the manager is interesting. That means you have to demonstrate you have not a criminal sanction in your background. In your background. Condition of financial securities and professional skills, as we have discussed before. Of course, you have to demonstrate you have an insurance to provide such activities. For instance, the ORIAS will delete 1/3 and a half of intermediaries in July this year, because most of them have not insurance. And I have a discussion with the director of the ORIAS. He told me that he will delete approximately between 1/3 and a half of intermediaries on the registration.
How did he find that out, that they didn't have insurance? Does he do a yearly questioning? I mean, so they can come back to you, even though that you're not regulated by the ACPR or the AMF.
Exactly.
The ORIAS itself is a mini regulator that will come back and check on these items.
Exactly. I have my insurance. If they cannot demonstrate they have an insurance.
It's factual, but still you have to.
Some of those activities, as specifically the CIF, Conseiller en investissement financier, CIP, Conseiller en investissement participatif, but specifically for CIF, I not registered, but are light regulation by some associations, specifically association on financial intermediaries. You have the name of one of them, the ANACOFI, which is one of the well-known association for the CIF, and this association is in charge to regulate the activity of the CIF, even though they do not have any power to regulate as IMF or ACPR. It is as a SRO in the US. That means it is
like a self-regulated organization.
What does it mean, a SRO?
A self-regulated organization, and basically it's sort of like FINRA or something in the United States. In order to be on ORIAS, you have to adhere to the professional association that applies to your activity, and then that association will have its own requirements to be a member. So it becomes a quasi-regulator in that sense.
Alors, Dana, why comply with authorities' requirements? Friday, why you have to comply? First, well, as I said before, it is a choice. Is to know if you are in or out, right. But why to comply with?
Well, I mean, from my standpoint, and I don't think I actually introduced myself. My name's Dana Anagnostou, and I'm a partner at Kramer as well. I've been a lawyer all my life, starting in the United States and now here. And one of my main focuses is M&A acquisitions, capital raising, and startups in general. So one of the issues that comes up on files that we work on together is what is the regulatory status when we're doing the due diligence for investors? Are you regulated? Should you be regulated? Have you done what you're supposed to do? Have you at least done something? And if you've done something, should you do more? Is that the reason that you're doing the capital raising, for example, so that you will have the money in order to be regulated at a higher level, so to speak? So, I mean, we'd like to see at least regulation as a CIF or one of the other statuses that are sort of a lighter regulation, or at least that there's been a thinking about that and that there's a story to be told or an analysis that's been done. Yes, we've thought about it. Here's why we think that we're this. And here's our plan for getting, for being in compliance.
That means, Dana, for you and our experience, to comply with, not only because you must comply with law, of course, but that means it is important for the second tour in terms of with investors to demonstrate that you comply with law and regulation, because those investors, even though they have
absolutely,
funds,
we're working for funds, institutional investors, and they can't invest if they're investing in a company that itself is not compliant, or at least doesn't have a plan or will be compliant. I mean, that's just not, that's a non-starter.
Can maybe give an example of what is the content of a due diligence for our first tour or second tour, and specifically what kind of issues investors are expected from us?
The main issues for these kinds of companies are going to be the regulation and generally the intellectual property, the management, and what that makeup is and where that's going, what the plans for growth are. The two big legal issues tend to be, again, the regulation, which we're talking about now, and intellectual property. So if your product should be patented or should be protected, or there should be know-how, or at least there's confidentiality in place, that there's the right contracts that have been in place to protect the ownership of that property, whatever the ownership is. If it's something that the trademark is very, very important, that's been filed where it needs to be filed, those sorts of things. So we're going to look carefully at that, because ultimately that's what you're buying. You're buying a potential that's the business idea, the concept, protected however it can be protected, and then also in compliance with what it needs to be in compliance with. We don't worry so much as we would for a more established company about the commercial contracts that are in place, real estate, labor, all of that stuff, because that generally there's very little of it, and that's coming. So we look at that, of course. Those are areas we are going to look at. If there are employees, we'll double check that. But the two main areas, I would say, are regulatory and IP.
And we can see with our experience that having a license, even though it is the first layer of license, you have a price. It gives a price for the investors, because it lets you discuss on the price of your startup, of your company. Because having a license immediately gives you more possibility to discuss with investors, because you are registered, you are authorized by regulators to provide services. It gives you opportunity to discuss on your price of your company. Yeah,
obviously for the investor, the risk profile is very, very different if you're already registered and in compliance, and if you're not. Sometimes it's a complete non-starter, and sometimes it's a question of price.
Few examples, of course, you know most of them, with Ulul and KissKissBankBank in the 15, Lendix, who bought FinSquare in April this year. You know the story about the lending club. You know that France is, we have the question of the Brexit, of course, but France is in a specific situation when we have only one fintech in the top 100, which is SlimPay. Even though we have a lot of fintech and technology startup in France, the issue is, as often, we don't know how growth for the startups, and often they are going they were going to London. They will continue maybe to go to London. We'll see, or to the States for the second tour with investors. Few figures in terms of. I mentioned before the France Fintech Association, which is not all the fintech are not members of this association, but you have approximately 60 startup members of France Fintech. You have more than 100 startup members of the Association of the Finance Participative, and you have between 20 to 40 startup members of the France BlockTech, for the blockchain members of this association. It is a young market, of course, but it is growing more and more, specifically with the technology in France, which is one of the most important aspects for investors. I think it's time for question. It is quite difficult to present those status, even though at the end of the day you don't know what is my status. To be short, if you start without client, don't move, do nothing. I think it is best. It is better to be in live and to be before to die, if I may. That means if you have no client, if you are not above the radar control of the regulator, it is not time to have a heavy status. Then you have to make a choice between one of the status. It is agent for payment. It is a CIF, investment advisor, if you are providing activities on capital market and or wealth management or asset management. And it is, and this status, those two status, agent or CIF, are quite light. And if it lets you start with your activity with somewhere an approval with ORIAS, which is based on nothing. Then you have to make a decision for an application to the ORIAS, SCPR on IMF, and which status. It takes time, as I said before. In practice, more or less 1 year. It depends if your activity is totally new or it is a description activity. Because it is totally a description activity, regulator will take time to ensure you will not disrupt totally the others. This is their job too. It will take time for you to explain your business and your new business activity with regulators. And don't underestimate the time that you have to discuss with regulators to convince on your business plan. And you will convince them if you are not only alone, if you have some people coming from the industry, if you are in your capital or your advisory board, people from this industry, if you are coming directly from nowhere, more difficult to have an authorization. This is the reality. The reality is people in this industry are working together, and if they don't know you, they will never give you an authorization if you don't provide to them a confidence that you understand your business. At the end, you must start with something. Again, if you don't have the right status, it is not important to start. The most important is when you have some figures and you are doing your first tour with a fund for an application to one of those regulators. Then a few words to conclude, maybe?
Just to repeat what you said, but I think it's important when you're starting off to to think about one of these lighter statuses, but also to have a longer view, which you probably have in any event in your business plan. But don't forget the regulatory side, so that you can show investors when the time comes that you've thought it through. You're not there yet, but when XYZ happens, you plan on it, and you've been putting things in place. You've looked at the requirements. You know what is in store for you, and you will be able and ready when the time comes to meet those. It's not just a question of money. It's a question of a number of different things, and you've sort of thought through that. It's a parallel process. So even though you're not necessarily applying, you're getting ready for it from day one, in my mind.
Yes, how does it cost? It depends for the status. For CIF and to be registered to the ORIAS, you can do alone. Yes, that means no cost. If you want to have an agreement from SCPR on IMF, it is between all in 20,000 to 50,000 euros external cost from advisors. Then you have another question: what is the best place to be registered? Paris, London, Luxembourg, or other locations? You have something that you have to totally forget, that to have the idea that Luxembourg is easiest than the France. It is not true. They are more business oriented, but it is exactly the same regulation. The same in London or in Dublin. That means it is not a question of regulation. It is a question of how regulators are implemented those regulations. Mm-hmm. And Luxembourg is clearly more business-oriented, but the regulation is the same. And to be registered in Luxembourg, you must live in Luxembourg. And you must have people in Luxembourg. The same in Dublin or London and others. Again, the content of the file is exactly the same in all locations in Europe. It's just a question of discussion with your regulators. Some regulators are more business-oriented and others less, clearly in France they have changed in mind since the last 2 or 3 years. When I was to Crédit Agricole 5 years ago, we have decided to be registered for the payment activities not in France but in Luxembourg, Crédit Agricole. Today, I am quite sure we will not take the same decision because ACPR as IMF have clearly changed, and they are more open mind to discuss with you and to help you.
So what is the approach that some of these regulators are taking towards blockchain today? Who's
For
open
regulators, the approach from regulators on blockchain?
on blockchain, yeah.
Wait and see first, but not only. ACPR, this is my view. First, they know the issue. They have some people who are very technical on blockchain, including on pure tech, not only on regulation. Today, they have no idea if it is good or not good. They are quite neutral. They don't see the blockchain as a regulatory issue. This is a technical tool, if I may. That means they are totally neutral in terms of regulation for the blockchain. Then you are maybe aware that if you want to provide some activities with blockchain, again you have to comply with some statutes. ESMA, European Securities Authority, have issued early June, I think it was the 6th of June, a long paper which describes what are the implications for the blockchain, for the industry, and if you provide, for instance, a depository activity, you must comply with the depository status. That means the first reaction of European regulator is blockchain more or less is somewhere in one of the status. If you want to provide an activity in the investment services with the blockchain, you will fall more or less in one of the regulated status. This is the first approach from regulators, which is more or less to, okay, blockchain is interesting, but at the end it is something which is regulated.
Are there locations or regulators? Is FCA more open than ACPR, or is ACPR more open than CIF? Any view on that?
Between you and me, even though we are registered, by history, IMF is more open-minded vis-à-vis business than ACPR, but it has changed, specifically on payment services, because clearly this activity of payment services is one of the activities which is most disruptive, and now ACPR is clearly open-minded with a new startup. But they are doing their job, which is to protect clients and investors. They are not there only to give you an approval. They are just to ensure that the approval is accurate. You are right, as I said before with my experience at Crédit Agricole, few years ago, they were far to the business and the need for newcomers and the need to let newcomers in this activity to compete with the old industry, if I may. This is not the case today. The majority of the file at ACPR IMF is for newcomers.
Good morning. What do you think about the sandbox concept developed by FSA in UK? In order
Maybe you can explain for the others?
Yeah, in fact, the sandbox concept is to support the development of fintech in UK, but without the weight of regulation. The fintech has been protected about future problems if these problems comes with a final customer, if I well understood.
Difficult to answer because the answer is not on my hands, of course. The answer is but I hope we will have something similar in France. It is clearly a demand from the IMF is not comfortable. You are saying, and ACPR, no ACPR. Yes, but we all together have to convince them by discussion, bilateral discussion on on the need to have this approach. Again, IMF and SCPR have a long story on the first protection of the clients and investors, and they are not in mind. They were not in the mind that they are here to help startup and newcomers to do something in this industry. And this is why I think the new two fintech offices at SCPR IMF is the first sign of something is moving, even though we are far again with what happens in London. But this is our role to convince them, of course, huh? But long way.
Bonjour Hubert, thank you for being here, very interesting. I'm actually launching a fintech. Our service should be live in October. I was actually going to ask about sandboxing, so I won't ask about that, but similar question. I think end of May, the ACPR and the AMF announced a joint task force to address fintech issues, etc. And I actually thought it was going to be some sort of a French sandbox. I'm not so convinced about that anymore, and you let slip earlier that one of the AMF's jobs was to protect the incumbents. I find that interesting because I think my job is to disrupt the incumbent. So, what is the true line? What is the official line? Is the AMF really looking to push fintech forward into the future, or is it just marketing? Do you understand? Just marketing, and is the AMF and the ACPR here really just to protect the existing players? And I ask this because France is a particular market in the sense that it's very concentrated. You have very few banks. There are 4 big banking groups. Compared to the US, compared to the UK, it is much more difficult for fintechs because of that, right? So how do we convince the AMF to not just be on a marketing stance and actually make things move? Thank you.
I think with my discussion with IMF and ACPR officers, I have seen during the last not 2 years, maybe 18 months, a change in mind, clearly, even though it is not totally today the reality. This is thanks to discussions at associations as such, France Fintech and others are doing with those regulators. That means we try to convince them to move in this direction, even though the reality is not today as you described. They are convinced. You are just to listen what ministers and others are doing and on the medias and others. That okay, we want to do something, but be aware that if you look about the law, which is my job, you look about what is the definition of the role of IMF. You don't see what you expect. You see to protect investors and to protect the market. This is the two roles of the IMF: to protect investors and to protect the market. This is not to help newcomers to entrance for this industry. This is maybe part of the explanation. By law, their mission is to protect third parties or the market. This is not to help you. By law. To protect investors can be done by competition through, but again, it will take time. It takes time to change in mind that you can protect investors with competition too, because we are viewed as a startup, as disruptive people who are playing with regulation to be more out regulation than in regulation. Even though you are in regulation, you often take the light status and not the heavy status. Then you have a strong lobby from the banking industry. This is absolutely true. You have just to see what happens concerning the banking monopoly and the fact that this banking monopoly is unique in Europe, in France, and the banking industry has lobbied a lot during the last months with the parliament to limit the possibility to open this banking monopoly. This explains why it is difficult to change so quickly if we compare with London and others. But if you discuss again with IMF and ACPR officers, specifically on the top of the management, they are clearly in a way to change not their role, but their habits, if I may, and that means to help you as newcomers.
I got a couple of questions regarding agent payments. Agents, sorry. First of all, is there a register that's available online where you can find all...
Registered, sorry?
A register available online?
Yeah.
Yeah? On the ACPR website?
No, on the ORIAS.
Okay, so whenever
Totally online.
So whenever you're an agent of payment, you're on ORIAS.
Sorry?
Whenever you're an agent of payment agent,
Yeah.
you're on ORIAS
Yeah.
automatically.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And you were talking about due diligence performed by investors. Typically for a payment agent, what would they be? Would they be like, what are you going to do if you become registered one day, regulated, or what kind of due diligence do they perform? Pretty broad.
You mean you're an agent today and
Yep.
you're planning to become a payment institution yourself?
Yep.
I think they're going to look at whether you have in place the various items that the ACPR is going to ask for. What does your file look like? How realistic is it that you could actually get that license? What's it going to cost? Who do you already have? Who do you need? What are your deltas there between what you have and what you need?
In your situation, it's not exactly the same than with another status, because as an agent, you are under the control and the supervision of
a payment institution.
Of the
exactly,
register.
the payment service company. That means due diligence are in this case more on the institution and less on the agent. That means, let me give you an
what you're
example.
doing today.
Oh, really? So if my regulated entity fucks up, then it's on me?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Alors, yes, but be careful again. Some people are
And vice-
thinking that,
and vice
okay, in
versa.
this case I can choose payment institution in Gibraltar, or in Malta, or in Cyprus. Don't do that.
Yep.
Even though they are member of EU. Don't do that, because investors are not...
Yeah.
Not happy about that.
And I got a last question. What's your stance on talking to ACPR and AMF regarding stuff that you don't know? Do you go and consult them? Are they open-minded? Or are they going to say, oh, you're not doing that at the moment? We're going to investigate on you and we're going to fine you?
I think that's for you. So I don't.
No, fine.
The actual talking with
Can you
them.
maybe give you an example of what you have in mind?
Nothing in particular, like my KYC procedures. Can I call them and say, okay, at the moment I'm doing this. Is that enough for you? Because it's by the book. I find it pretty light, but it's by the book. Can I call them and say, honestly, this is what I'm doing. Do you think I should do more? Or if I call them saying, I'm only doing this, they're going to start an investigation and I'm better off not doing anything.
When you are telling them, is ACPR and IMF?
ACPR. Can I call them and say, okay, I have a problem, please help me? Or are
No.
they going to... Really? No?
Yes and no. If you want to, if you see them as an advisor, they will often answer to you, I am not an advisor. This is your decision. If you are in a way for an application, in this case you can interact with
If you're
them and discuss,
pre-application.
and they are clearly open mind to discuss with you. But if you are not registered, if you have yet registered, and you just have in mind, can I do something, can I not do something, and you give a call, they will tell you, call to your lawyer. I am not your lawyer.
Hello, thank you for this presentation. It's very good. I'm currently running a solution that enables cross-border transfer via telephone and domestic transfer via telephone anywhere in the world. I'm targeting developing countries, Africa mainly, and I'm looking for what is the accurate regulator to get some green light to go on and further on for my customers.
I have not, with Dana, we have not discussed on the passport, on the European passport, which is, as you know, one of the main issues of the Brexit, and Dana will give you more about that. Some of the states have the passport, the European passport. Some have not. That means if you are CIF, conseiller en investissement financier, this is purely local. You cannot provide investment service through Europe with this status. You have to provide, you must have in this case a European passport with ISP, investment service provider, or as a payment institution. That means if you want to provide your activity across Europe, one of the first decisions for you is to take a status which allow you to have the passport in Europe, but in Europe only, of course, not in Africa or otherwhere. Then we can have few words on the Brexit and the passport.
Well, I mean, from a Brexit standpoint, as we've all heard in the news, it's really up in the air right now as to what the negotiations are going to come out at. Right now, I mean, just pure Brexit, you're out of the passport. That's the basic rule. And if the 2-year period goes by without an actual agreement, then that's what's going to happen. Passports won't be available. They won't cover London anymore. We would expect the negotiations to arrive at something where they'll be part of the EEA, and some of these directives, some of these will apply to them. We would hope. We're hoping.
Alors, something quite technical. As you have understood, in this financial industry, we have directives and regulation. For all of those activities, we have the concept of the passport. But for some of those activities, we have another concept, which is third parties, members of EU, third countries, US, for instance. And the issue concerning the Brexit is that we do not have the same solution for all directives concerning the definition of third country. That means potentially UK will be a third country, but it will have not the same sense for investment services directive, nor payment services directive, or MIF directive, because the concept of third party is not the same. This is one of the big issues to be discussed with the UK concerning the Brexit, the content of third country for each activity.
Hi, many thanks for the presentation. I actually have 2 questions. The first one is, can you market yourself as a bank even though you don't have a full banking license? First question, because I mean,
what do you mean by bank? What do you mean by bank?
As a consumer, I have no idea what a payment account is. And when you want to work on a pure bank account product without all the other stuff within the universal banking area, you could choose to file for payment institutions, right? But in that case, can you market yourself as a bank account?
You cannot hold yourself out as being a bank in any way, or even imply that you might be a bank by saying, for example, I'm licensed in Switzerland. We would ask that you say, but not in France, if you're here in France. I mean, we really can't imply that you're a bank in any way if you don't have that license. It's a pretty heavy rule.
Okay. And the second question is, at the end of the process with the ACPR or the AMF, the resulting capital requirements always seems to be higher than the minimal, regulatory requirement.
Yeah.
Is it possible to make money on the management a function of the capital that you have instead of the other way around? Like, meaning, can you negotiate the fact that you can onboard clients, gradually?
And increase your capital as your clients increase, and your that's part of that.
To give you an example on asset management, which is something that we do a lot, but as a payment services too. If you want to have a license as an asset manager, you must have 4 people, not 2, not 3, not 5, but 4 people. This is not written somewhere. This is only reality. But those 4 people, the idea is not to have those 4 people when you apply for the license. It's when you have granted the license. That means in your business plan, which is a 3-year business plan, you will explain your growth and the fact that you will hire people in parallel of your growth. And it is condition precedent, more or less, condition precedent for regulators to follow you during those 3 years to ensure you comply with what you said in your application. That means you can start with few people, with few capital requirement. That's the minimum of capital requirement, of course. But if you decide to grow during the next 2 years and you multiply by 2 your revenues, that means you have to multiply not only by 2, but at the same time some charges. And in this case, your capital requirements and AMF and SAPR will check during those 2 or 3 years if you comply with what you said in your application. And this is important because the question is not to have your full picture when you have your license, is just to let you growth during the 3 years and to see if you comply with what you said in your application. I don't know if I answered to the question, but this explains they are flexible in the meaning that okay, you cannot start with only 1 people or half of people, but you have at least for asset management, you must be 4 people. For payment services, it is less, but it depends. And then you have to grow your headcounts and you have to grow your revenues and at the same time your charges.
Maybe just one small comment on that. We had actually considered being an SGP, Société de Gestion de Portefeuille, so an asset manager. The AMF actually told us in the end that it wasn't worth it and that we should just be a SIF. So we smiled and said, thank you very much. Part of the discussion was based on the capital. And so it's interesting that you say that you can convince the AMF that your business plan over time will fit their requirements. I'm not so sure about that being the case for capital. So do you have experience working with startups where they don't have the money yet, but they want to start the discussions? Because our experience was clearly negative.
Yeah, my experience is positive in this sense. That means SCPA and IMF are not expected for you to have this minimum capital requirements when you make your application. It is when you have the authorization. Then the day after you have your license, this is a condition precedent. You must comply with the minimum capital requirements. And as I said, it depends of the status. For some status, you do not have any minimum capital requirements. For those, you have 50,000, 125,000 euros. It depends. But this is minimum capital requirements. That means you have to add to this minimum. The reality is the following: is 20 to 25% of your charges during the 3 years. That means ACPR and IMF will challenge you not on revenues, of course, but on your charges. They will ensure that your charges are not is accurate in the meaning that it is easy to see a picture on the growth of revenues, but it is most difficult to have a reality on charges. And this is why how ACPR and IMF are seeing your minimum capital requirement is not only by what the law says, but what they expected. It is not only a French vision, it is the same in other countries. That means you have to add to the minimum capital requirement 20 to 25% charges during the 3 years experience. And in this case, they will follow you every year to ensure you comply with the minimum capital ratio plus the add-on, if I may. That means the 20 to 25 charges during those years. But my experience is, again, is quite different than you. That means they are quite open to follow the startup and not to have at the beginning the minimum of capital.
Hubert, in the French market at the moment, what are the more common types of startups, fintech startups? And second question related to that, which ones, based on all the different regulatory requirements, are more likely to succeed? And a third related question, startups by their nature, they want to be disruptive of the market. and those that have to go through all the regulatory requirements, would it not be better to be aligned with some of the major institutions that exist already, that already have the regulatory requirements?
Your first question relates to?
What are the big trends at the moment in terms of startups that are coming
Payment
to
services. Payment services. Yes, clearly payment services. Asset management we can see more and more application from to IMF on not only on asset management but globally on investment services, including on portfolio management and robot. But payment services are on the top. This is clear. Last year it was more on lending and on crowd lending, because we have seen during the last 18 months maybe from 10 to 60 new crowd lending platforms, even though most of them are not working today. But this is due to the fact that requirements are quite light for crowd lending. If you compare with payment services, even though it is as an agent or as a payment institution, requirements are more heavy for those activities. But this year it is payment services, in my view. Second question?
Which ones are more likely to succeed based on the regulatory requirements for each one?
Agent, of course. My view is again, if the best for you is to start with something which is quite light. An agent for payment services is very light. SIF, investment service advisor, is very light too. And more or less you can, except for insurance, you can fall in one of the two status for banking, for investment services, asset management. That means if you start with agent and or investment advisor, you are quite. You are quite vis-à-vis regulators. And again, it is very easy. Very easy. You don't need a lawyer to help you to make such application, because it is something you can download on the internet, and you can do it directly with the association as Anacofi, as I mentioned before. And your third question?
And the third question was, by their very nature, startups want to be disruptive of the market and the financial market. Would it be more advisable perhaps to align themselves with existing financial institutions if they want to do that?
Difficult question. This is not my view. This is not my view, because in this case, disruption will be quite short. I don't know how you can disrupt if you are in your capital, if you have in your capital, specifically in the majority of your capital, a financial institution. In my view, partnership with financial institutions makes sense, of course, specifically for distribution. But I will not give example because but you can see some of new players having interesting advertising vis-à-vis the banking industry, and who have in their capital banks. I don't understand. I don't understand how does it work in the long time. That means for me, the most efficient way is to develop the partnership specifically for distribution to acquire clients vis-à-vis the financial industry, banks, asset managers and others, but not to have immediately part of your capital with those institutions.
Hubert, how do you see the future of private equity linked to fintech? Because private equity, because we see some new model like Ragtime with Stéphanie L'Hospital, who's starting to mix crowdfunding, accelerators, and private equity. So it seems that the frontier between those two businesses and two activities are more and more gray, and that some of the players will try to mix all of that. But how is this related to a regulation? And how the regulators handle this kind of
What do you mean by private equity? As an activity to be disruptive or disrupted, or as an investor?
Yeah, private equity disrupted. Because it seems that she's disrupting this business, and the more we work with private equity, the more we do believe that we could disrupt that.
I have no specific idea on your question because maybe this is due to the fact I have seen nothing in this sense. That means I have seen no experience, no a project on private equity as a people who wants to stop this activity. Look, the example of the family is one example of private equity, a new model, if I may. Not only, but this is maybe quite of the answer. That means private equity is people coming from a very traditional financial industry with a view which is the same from the last 20 years. I have not seen any change in mind concerning those people in this activity, except to invest now as private equity fund in the fintech, but how this activity itself will be disrupted, I don't know. Maybe you have more ideas than me.
Because on one side, a private equity fund is a closed fund. You make your fund and then it's closed and you invest. And with the fintech, you can manage a fund, an open fund, in fact, because you can feed your fund as long as you move forward with your project, and so you can add and adapt and open the ability for your high net worth individuals or skilled investors
we have legal
invest
issues
on a
with
case
the
by case
concept
basis.
of IEFM directive and the concept of IEF and the fact that are you in this case qualified as a fund or not? You know the issue for holding company or for people who are working together without being a fund to be qualified as a fund. Yeah.
That could be mixed because I was willing to ask also currently at Orias you have to pick to be either a CIP or a CIF. You cannot be both, it's exclusive. So I'm wondering, is it because of the business model with who is paying the bulk of the fees, or is it to restrict such kind of evolution? Because if you want to disrupt a bit more, you would need to be both CIF and on the
yeah, you are right. Some of the status we have presented are exclusive, which is quite difficult in this case because you cannot be an agent on the banking on EOB, and you cannot be an agent on banking, and at the same time to be registered as an investment service provider. That means you have often to open two. To create, to set up two companies, which is totally crazy, but this is a reality. So the statuts are totally exclusive. Why? Because they are local statuts, they are not European statuts. Again, keep in mind that we have the definition of those statuts from Europe, investment provider services, for instance, asset managers, and others are often local, are coming from local regulation. And they are exclusive because it is prohibited by EU to combine a non-EU status with a EU status, to be short. And coming back to your point, again, I don't know, but maybe some of the answer is coming, is part from the difficulty is on the difficulty to be qualified as a IEFM directive, and the fact that if you have a portfolio, more or less you are doing the job of an asset manager. Investment advisor is part of the answer, but in this case, as you said, it is exclusive with the other status. This is why it is difficult to find an answer in this case.
My question is, what is, from your point of view, the best place to start fintech using blockchain in Europe? Because, and in Europe now, because it depends on the mindset of the regulator. And is it Paris? Is it Berlin? Is it Dublin? Is it Luxembourg?
It depends what kind of activity you want to provide with blockchain. Is it on the credit side, on the capital market?
It's on remittances.
Sorry?
It's on remittances.
I have no idea, clearly. I have no idea.
Okay.
As I said before, blockchain is viewed totally neutral today by the French regulators. And EU, the first the first paper coming from EU regulators, ESMA, is clear. Be careful, you will fall within one of the EU status. This is for the investment services. We can expect a similar paper from the EBA, European Banking Authority, which will maybe issue a paper on the banking side, and you can expect another paper from the insurance EIOPA authority in the last months. That means the first feeling of regulators is first to close the door. Is to close the door in the meaning that, okay, you want to use technology, no problem, but you have to comply with EU regulation, which is fair. In this case, we come back to my first point, are you in or out regulation? You can provide activity with blockchain and being out regulation. It depends how you provide the activity. Because often you can provide the same activity being in or out regulation. It depends what exactly you provide.
It depends on the maturity of the business.
Of course, too.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. You said that newcomers fall in with regulation or play with regulation to operate. From your imagination, a little perspective, what should happen what should the proposition of ACPR or AMF if a newcomer shows that today's players are not compliant with, for instance, European accounting laws in force? What should be the...
Before or after
today,
your license?
Today. Before.
Before the license, you will never have your license in this case.
Okay. And what should be
the best way for a regulator to say no, because they don't say no, they just don't answer. This is better. Because if they say no, legally speaking, you can sue them. Why you are saying no? Well, this is totally theoretical. But the best way for them is to no answer. When you are waiting for an application for a license. If it is after an application for a license and you have a license, they have power to fine you. They can oblige you to respect the law, and if you don't comply, to close your activity. This is the reality in every country. But again, you know, it is a life. The file is there or is there. If they prefer that your file, because the file is not in accordance with what they expect in terms of regulation with your project, they prefer not to answer and to let your file not on the top, but on the bottom of the file. Okay, it starts to finish. Thank you for your patience and thank you for your time.
Que l'enfant